Hey everybody, my name is Kristian Freeman. I'm the developer advocate for Cloudflare Workers, and I just wanted to intro this video that I'm putting up on this channel. This is an interview I did with Knut from Sanity.io. We recently, on the Workers team, launched Built with Workers, which is kind of a showcase of cool projects that you can build with Cloudflare Workers. I'll put a link to that in the description, so make sure to check that out. And in this interview, I talk about Built with Workers, how it works, how we're using Workers to deploy JAMstack applications, and a whole lot of other stuff. I thought it would be really interesting, if you're using Workers and you want to see how we are thinking about deploying our projects using Cloudflare Workers, hopefully you'll find it interesting and useful. So thanks. Let me know in the comments what you think about the interview. Make sure to like and subscribe for future Workers content that's going to be on this channel, and enjoy the rest of the video.
Hi, and welcome to this interview with Kristian Freeman, developer advocate at Cloudflare. I am Knut, I'm head of developer relations at Sanity.io, and in this video we talk about how they made the new Built with Workers site, using Gatsby for the front end and Sanity as the content backend. I hope you enjoy the talk.
Well, yeah, let me, maybe I'll just share my screen and I can just sort of walk through how, I'll try and do a little bit of storytelling, I guess. And then if you have questions, just feel free to interrupt.
Should start with Cloudflare Workers. What are they?
Yeah.
I use them.
Yeah, totally. Can you see that okay? Screen
Yeah.
share? Okay. Yeah, let me open up the website. Yeah, so Cloudflare Workers is basically it's a serverless platform for running serverless code. And obviously the idea with serverless is that you're basically deploying functions, like code functions. In our case, we support JavaScript, and then via WebAssembly, we support Rust, and then we do support C and C++, but to be frank, I don't know how to write either of those. So it's, in theory, that should be a thing you can do, but I could not offer any sort of support on that. But yeah, we're really focused on JavaScript and Rust. And and so we basically have a couple other sort of things around. I can scroll down a little bit. The two sort of key things you need to know are that with Workers, there's this idea of basically running things on what we call the edge. And so basically what that means is Cloudflare. I guess I should explain what Cloudflare is too, if people don't know. It's basically we have a bunch of servers running all over the world, and we do sort of DNS and routing and a little bit of CDN stuff. It's all kinds of things basically to make your website faster. And basically we had all of these servers running all over the place, and we had CPU to spare. And so we said okay, well, what if we let people run JavaScript on these servers? And so that's basically how that works. And I mean, not basically, there's a lot more going on there than that, but kind of the stuff that's interesting to me and why I was really interested in joining the team is that basically, as opposed to other serverless things like Lambda, or I don't actually remember what Google's is called. It's Cloud Functions, I think, right? Everyone kind of has one, right? The idea with Workers is that basically the workers can either serve as what we call an origin, which is a client makes a request to the worker, and that request sort of terminates at the worker and then is sent back. Or it can run in between your origin, which is wherever your server or your application is actually running. And it can kind of act as a proxy, or it can act as a firewall. It can basically do all kinds of things. It's a request response based model that can run in between anything. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. And recently in particular, we've started to explore more of this, what happens if Workers is your origin? So what happens if you are just serving stuff directly from Workers? And so for my background as a full stack developer, that basically means running React applications, or running some sort of full stack application, or JSON APIs or stuff like that. Directly on the network. Yeah, okay, that was a lot. So the last thing I'll say is I'm not sure it's actually shown here, but we have two things that are super cool, particularly having workers run at the edge on all those servers. We also have a product called Workers KV that you basically get with your paid workers plan. It's like $5 a month. And you basically get like a key value store that you can access through JavaScript, like right on the edge. And so we have a team at Cloudflare called the Workers Developer Experience Team, which is like kind of unofficially what I'm on. And we basically said like, okay, well, what if we build like a way to run basically like JAMstack apps and other things, other static applications. But we're like, what if we could just do like JAMstack using Workers KV? And so we built this thing called Workers Sites, and then from there, like that basically idea is like it's Netlify or like Zeit or something like that, where you can like put your static site up there. And then as soon as you built that, I was like, okay, like it's time for me to build something cool with this, right? Like the reason that we ever started talking, the reason I ever explored Sanity was because I was really interested in JAMstack and really interested in like Gatsby and static sites and stuff like that. So like it was a really natural thing for me. Like as soon as you launched that, I was like, okay, please let me go like mess around with this and like do something cool. So yeah, and the result of that was at the same time, we had a lot of people building cool stuff with workers, but not a great way to show it. And not a good way to show, for instance, with Workers KV, like what do people, like you can kind of understand it conceptually, like what does that mean? But like, what are you actually going to go make with it, right? And so the result was we built this built with workers site that it's a JAMstack app. It's Gatsby, statically built, and then Sanity is our kind of data store. What do you guys call it? Do you call it like a data store? Do you call it like a, what is it? A
Yeah, so
CUR, not CRM. What's the acronym I'm looking for?
CNS.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we ended up like talking about Sanity as a platform for structured content because
Structured content. Okay.
yeah, there's bits and pieces and stuff going on.
Sure.
I guess you're talking like the content store, like where the
Right.
actual content is stored.
Yeah. No, I like that. Structured content store. That sounds good. Yeah, because well, yeah. So for us, like we could have like manually written JSON back and forth, like in our Workers KV product, but like that works for like me, right? And like I don't want to maintain all the content. Other people want to come in and add stuff. And so I had experience, as you mentioned earlier, like with Bitesize and with ByteConf. Like I've been using Sanity a long time in my own projects. I used it for a front end job board as well. It literally feels like years ago, but it was 1 year ago basically. But there was, yeah, as time flies. So yeah, I've used it a lot, and I advocated for it pretty strongly internally. And the result I think is something we're all really happy with. I'm happy to kind of dive through that. I will say the stuff that we will talk about, there's like a blog post that I wrote on the Cloudflare blog called JAMstack at the Edge. How we built with workers on workers. That title made me laugh as I was writing. It's very like kind of sort of circular. It's basically a blog post about like all the technical decisions we made, why JAMstack works really well on workers and why we're excited about JAMstack and like why we like Sanity and all this stuff. I'm sure, I'll pass this along to you and we can get it in like the video description and stuff like that. But yeah, I guess that will be my sort of initial spiel.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was a lot. So yeah, what do you think we should jump into?
Yeah, first of all, like I think you underplay how cool workers are because
Okay.
when I shared the link like with the SRE team and they realized what you had done, they were like, "Whoa!"
Yeah.
All the V8 stuff and like the code execution is like,
right.
if people like should like go a bit more into what is happening there.
Yeah. Well, so you're right. I didn't do a great job talking about that. So like the idea is basically like we've taken V8, which is like what underlies Chrome. It's like a JavaScript engine, and we've put it on all of our servers to run your JavaScript. And so it basically is like the service worker API, which to be honest, I didn't have that much exposure to before I joined at all. What's nice about it is that it doesn't feel it just feels like writing vanilla JavaScript. Like I never particularly feel like I'm out of my depth. You know what I mean? But with the V8 engine, like we basically take every time that your worker is like called or like spun up, and it wraps it in this V8 isolate, which is like this little V8 process. And that has a lot of security benefits. Like all of your stuff is sort of isolated, isolate. It's isolated inside of that. And it also just runs really, really fast. So there's like I think I'm technically not allowed to say there is no cold start, if people are familiar with that concept from other serverless things where you have this like kind of time for your function to spin up, but it is like very, very minimal. It's like almost, it seems like a number I should know off the top of my head, but it's like negligible basically, right? Yeah. So you're right. I maybe should like undersold that a little bit. Cause like in my head is always like, at like, it's really fast. It's really easy to deploy. Like we have this command line tool you can see here called Wrangler, that the team that I'm on sort of maintains. It's an open source Rust CLI for deploying stuff. But I'm always like, yeah, it's in some ways it's like kind of the best possible situation because it's like so fast that I never really think about it. Like I've kind of just taken it for granted at this point, and I'm like, okay, now what can I go build with it? But you are right. That might be something that I should do a better job of calling out like in the future when it comes up.
Yeah, I guess like a random code execution is something that as React people probably is a bit like, ugh, about, but like having it like in isolate and stuff seems like super, super cool.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And there's the other thing I think that's cool. One thing that I try to keep an eye on with it running V8, like there's a lot, you can basically sort of follow like the V8, like change log basically. Right. And so like, there's things like, I don't know. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but that's like, I think either out or like we're very close to releasing it. Like that kind of stuff, we stay really, really up to date, like with the V8 releases. And so like that kind of stuff, like you're using like a really modern version of JavaScript, and you don't have to so like we'll put things in Wrangler, we'll like pass things through Webpack for you to sort of bundle things, but we don't do like, we don't need to do for the most part like a lot of the Babel sort of stuff, because it's like a super modern version of JavaScript that's built right in. So like async await and stuff like that too. I know that's, to me, that still feels very new. Maybe it's not new anymore, but like to have that just sort of like built in is like really, it's very nice kind of place to experiment and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Cool. Yeah, I guess we could like start to dive into the actual site.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, like I mentioned earlier, like it's Gatsby and Sanity is the content store behind it. And sort of like from a high level, the concept is basically that we have these individual projects. And a project is basically, there's the usual stuff like title, a little bit of description, image, and all that kind of stuff. And just to sort of reiterate like the concept behind like using Gatsby and Sanity, like when I'm clicking through this, like everything is statically built. So like at build time, it's going and making, a request to Sanity and getting all this stuff, passing it through React, compiling all of it. And in that way, it's like really simple. This is something I talk about in the blog post. Like it's so easy to reason about because with the exception of this bookmarked thing here, which we can talk about a little bit later, it's like maybe the one kind of funky, cool thing like in this code base. Like the rest of this is like so straightforward. I guess, I mean, you would know this better than I do, but like when we do refresh the page, I guess this is probably actually making a request to Sanity? I could open up the network tab and look. It's just, no, it shouldn't, right?
Or if you have images, it will like fetch the image.
Oh yeah, from the CDN, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and a thing that I'll say for me and for Adam, who is the designer on this project, this is actually his project here, Web Scraper. He was really, I think the thing he was most excited about, and this is a props to you guys at Sanity, is like, and to Gatsby's like sort of image stuff, but like all of this like loading an image set and having it be like correctly sized and like responsive and like pretty what's the word I would use, I guess, sort of like resource friendly or like bandwidth friendly is maybe the way I'd put it. Like all that stuff was really cool. Just to like, it was basically, we got it for free, right? And like when we come back here and we refresh, like all of these are lazy loaded and stuff like that. So and like that's kind of a like the 1-2 punch of like Gatsby Insanity to me is like, you guys work really well with like the sort of primitives that Gatsby is exposing, and so it makes it really easy. Like I'm so bad at optimization kind of stuff because I never think about it. It's a thing that I think a lot of people don't think about because like we all have really fast internet connections and stuff like that. But it's something I think from my perspective, it seems like you guys have been really considerate about, which has made our job really useful. Right, like we have a really high like 90s lighthouse score or something, and basically have done like nothing, which is cool. So yeah, I think another thing I can show off is this idea of what we call collections, and this is like a concept that that I talk about in the blog post. And I'll actually just hop into the schema here. And don't be upset, but I actually do have 6 updates that I need to do.
Yeah.
I remember last time I showed you, or I had a video with a different sanity schema, and it was like super out of date. And you were like, "You need to update it. It looks so weird." This one is more up to date than my other projects, but still a couple updates to do there.
There's a bit of context perhaps, because the studio, like this like editing environment, is open source React single page application.
Yeah.
We ship updates for it pretty frequently, so that update thing often pops up if you have this like for more than 2 weeks or something. So
Yeah, it's super useful. Yeah, and like when we spun up our like data set for Built with Workers, we basically had like the sort of way that the project started was like, for me, like I'm pretty familiar with Gatsby Insanity, but like I think the part that everyone else on the team was really excited about was within like minutes, I basically had this part of it like deployed somewhere, right? It's at Sanity Studio, sanity.studio, and like they could go in and look and like start to give feedback on like how it's laid out and stuff like that. And as I mentioned, Adam, who I worked with on this project, it kind of like a developer designer hybrid. So like it was really useful for him in particular to like have that and like really start to like concretely reason about like what the things should be in this studio explicitly, like the fields and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a really awesome workflow.
I think so, because before you tended like to go into Photoshop or Sketch or perhaps even Figma and like draw down the pages and like hand them down to the developer who had the responsibility to implement the stuff. Like starting from the opposite side, like the content seems like to be a sort of better pattern.
Absolutely. And the thing that goes with that is Adam really explicitly told me, he's like, I don't do lorem ipsum. I was like, okay, good. That's like, that seems good to me. So yeah, we've always worked with, from like day one, Adam and I started putting our projects that we've been building with workers in here. And like, that's been the way that we sort of architected it. So yeah. The main thing I think I want to show here, I mean, I can open up like a project and just sort of show you, like maybe just so I know that's something I'm allowed to show, I'll just show, well, maybe Built with Workers. So yeah, we have this idea of like a project, and all of these fields are here, like name, short description, long description. Images are just like built right in. So we can upload it, we can drop it in here. It goes to Sanity CDN. And then we have a couple things like a slug, which is like that URL, basically like the path on the website. And then we have features, which are, so basically the idea like with features is like Built with Workers uses this Workers sites product, which is like kind of our JAMstack deployment product in Workers KV. And so we add those here. Those actually aren't like really exposed in the UI right now, but in a previous version, we had like feature pages. We might reintroduce that, or so you can see like all the projects that use KV, all the projects that use sites, stuff like that. And then we have these links, which are, let's see if I can actually find, well, I'll just open up Web Scraper as an example. Like this link here, we have like a primary link, which is like this big hero sort of thing here. And then the other links come down here. I would say all of that is like pretty straightforward, like nothing too surprising there. The stuff that I got really excited about, and I think I spent a fair amount of time talking about in my blog post, was that we introduced like two sort of higher level things around it, around projects, that is. The first are these collections, and these are like a collection of projects, basically. And so this was like a really cool thing we could do with Sanity's sort of like, I don't know, do you guys call these like objects? What would you call, or like, they're not like models. They come from a Rails world. I can't remember what they call them.
I guess you tend to call them content types. They are
Contented
like formally like documents.
documents. That, I think
Yeah.
that's probably what the actual code would say is like a document, right?
Yeah.
And so what we do here is that we basically have two types of collections. One is sort of like curated or like custom. And so we can just add a set of collections here, or a set of projects, that is, in here. And then that becomes, you know, this like staff picks section here, right? And then we also have a different kind, which is just like based on a feature. So actually, I guess that feature thing in the project actually does get used here, where we can say, oh no, someone added those here. That's not how that should work. But I guess it seems like our site
Yeah.
hasn't broken. In theory, it should be auto-generated from
Um,
here. Okay, now I need to go talk
yeah.
to other people on my team.
Because you have made like sort of a content graph where there are references between like the feature documents and the project documents, and
Exactly.
Gatsby can use that to like get stuff in the right place.
Exactly. And I would say we actually aren't doing this as, like, what I really want to do is probably some sort of Gatsby like GraphQL magic, so I can just like construct all of this and like at build time. And so like this will just actually have all the like feature projects in here. But to be honest, we just do like one big GraphQL request and then we sort of just like we stitch it together that way, because like it's at build time, right? So like it's not gonna and this is like a thing that with me, like I would probably prefer to do something that's like not like a really badass optimized way of doing it for like my own sanity, pun intended. Like I would rather just make one big GraphQL request at the beginning, because like all of this stuff is so easy to access through like Gatsby's GraphQL stuff, and I'll just sort of construct it how I want it.
I can perhaps like explain how like our source plugin actually works. Because it's kind of cool. So when you like install the source plugin and give it your dataset and project ID, and what it actually does when you like build a site is to hit the export endpoint. So we stream your whole dataset to Gatsby. Gatsby's like in-memory data store in one request. And then we go and fetch your GraphQL schema definitions to prevent like accidental missing fields. So
Right.
Gatsby has this thing that it can infer the GraphQL schema from the content. And if some content is suddenly missing, that field isn't accessible anymore in your code and your build would break, and that sucks.
Yeah.
So to like build the whole Gatsby site, there's only like 2 requests that goes to us. So it doesn't matter if you do like one large GraphQL query or many in Gatsby, because they are just querying the in-memory data store. So like whatever you want.
Yeah, that, and it feels like I should just be able to sort of like crib off of that to do the thing, like the sort of additional like, you know, massaging of the data. Maybe we'll talk after this and I'll get your thoughts on that. But yeah, like it definitely seems like really, I mean, I notice like when I have the sanity like sort of stats up, like it doesn't, we actually end up building the project like every hour, and then we build also on like changes to this as well. Like anytime something's changed, there's like a webhook that fires and it kicks off like a GitHub Actions deploy. So, but with all that happening, like it doesn't seem like it's actually like really hammering the API at all. So that totally seems to make sense with what you're saying. Yeah, it's really cool. Having that sort of like advanced GraphQL Gatsby knowledge is definitely, I sort of see that might be like the next thing that I get really into, but we'll see. I feel like sort of a pull towards that right now, but
you have already done like some taxonomy page stuff with the front end jobs thing. but it isn't
Yeah.
too easy to do in Gatsby. I struggled with this like recently, just make like category pages and so on,
Yeah.
related posts, and yeah, so that's kind of stuff. It needs a bit of wrangling with the code to actually get in place.
For sure. Yeah. And I did see Chris Biscardi has like an egghead course that is like about Gatsby themes, but it actually has this whole little diversion into like custom schema stuff in
Yeah.
Gatsby. And I watched that and I was like, okay, this seems like the right direction for this kind of stuff, right? That I want to go into. I just haven't dived into it more since then. Um, so yeah, so the main thing I wanted to kind of cover here in the schema was, so we have these projects which fit into collections. The thing that I get really hyped about with this project is this like one little object here we have called the layout. So this is like the homepage layout. And this is like such a simple thing. It's a homepage name, page ID is homepage, but this is like truly like I get like very, very hyped about this is like this idea of putting collections inside of this layout and then basically being able to like dynamically reorder them on the homepage, especially when you're running the app locally and you can sort of reorder things and see a live preview updating. But like this is that sort of, like that meme of the like galaxy brain thing, like that's
Yeah.
like that's how I felt here with like in the past, like my stuff with Sanity was like, I mean, content modeling and stuff like that, right? And now what I'm like sort of getting into is like it's so easy to do that like the thing that excites me now is like modeling like the layout and like the UI of the application itself entirely inside of Sanity as well. And I think like it reduces the amount of, I mean, you could very easily imagine a world where like we're maybe like hard coding these collections here on the homepage, right? Like we have like collection ID equals staff picks or something like that, right? Like there's a world where we built it that way, but like we wanted to be able to be like flexible and there's stuff here we could do like, maybe it's not just collections, but it's also like UI components, like maybe the submit a project ends up getting moved down here or something. And it's just like a thing that we reorder inside of the schema. So now that we've launched the first version, we're like trying to kind of figure that stuff out. And it's something for me personally, like on my sites, I'm starting to think about that as well. And I think I might end up making a move to basically having like a layout primitive in my project as well and on the Bitesize website, because yeah, it's very, like I said, very like galaxy brain meme to me, or I was like, oh my God, this is so cool.
I
And
think this
yeah,
is a good like example of how you could abstract those things, because so I mentioned like the structured content thing, and there's some like thought behind that. It's like your content shouldn't be like too closely married to how it's presented in like
sure.
a certain website or something, because you
Yeah,
may want to use it elsewhere or you have to redesign it at some point and so on. But here you have like a fine like distinction between a layout thing and the actual content.
yeah,
And here you have like you have probably just references to those collections, right?
yep, yeah,
So
exactly.
if you wanted to make like a dedicated marketing landing page for workers for the campaign, you can totally like make a campaign page layout and do something else, right?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's like, I would imagine in the future, like there's probably a world where this ends up not even being collections, which sort of like components or something, for lack of a better term, or like, because I think in Sandy schema, like you could say that it's of like not just of like a type collection, but it could also be like, I don't know, button or row or something like that, right? Like
You
there's
can do
all,
whatever you want.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I'm so I'm like super hyped about that. And the other
Yeah.
thing that is great about this is like just going back to the deployment thing, like anytime that we make this change, it goes through our, I can show you here. This is like one thing I will say, the brief tangent, the project is open source. Also, if people want to check it out, it's just Cloudflare/built with workers on GitHub. But like every time that we have a change that happens, you can see like it literally is running like every hour. Maybe you don't actually need to do this, but it's just like a sanity thing. Another usage of that that pun
Like
from me.
jar.
Sorry, what
Coins.
was that?
We should have like a jar with some coins for every
Yes. Yeah.
episode.
Yeah, exactly. The pun jar would be very appropriate for me. But you can see like maybe I can actually filter here on event. So like we have this schedule. Well, you can't see it, but this is like on a schedule here. But we also have this repository dispatch, which basically like anytime a change happens in Sanity, it goes through the Sanity like webhook. I think that's just like on literally like any change, right? Can you be more like discerning about what that change is from that webhook? Like, is there extra info that comes in here or
Not
comes in
at
there?
the moment. So I
Okay.
tend to like, if I need that, I tend to like connect it to a function and like do the filtering there. That could be like a worker. Yeah.
It is actually, it is a worker. And I think maybe I included the code here. This is a really long blog post, by the way. So like if people, I think this is actually great that we're doing this video because like there's so much going on here. Did I? Yeah. So it literally is a worker. You can see this is like the entire code right here. Basically like the Sanity webhook makes a request to this worker, which is just like, it's actually on my local on my local workers account, which maybe should be changed to like the Cloudflare one. But it basically just like takes the webhook and we have this like authorization token here. It just makes a like a post request to this repo. And that so you know anytime something changes in the Sanity, like any of our content changes, you know, we reorder the layout of the UI and stuff like that. One of these fires off. Yeah, and we've been like really happy with that. I think like probably out of scope for like this video, but like I'm really getting into GitHub Actions recently, and so like it was also a natural thing for me to like pick this up and try and integrate it in the project. We literally, I think, built the deployment action for workers at the beginning of this project. Like I ended up building it because I was like, I don't want to run like, you know, Gatsby build, Wrangler publish on my own machine anytime someone wants something to be
No,
changed. You know what I mean?
no one wants that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so you have have you like connected the workers account to the GitHub account or project? That's how it works?
Um, it is, that's something we would like to explore in the future, is like actually connecting the two, but right now it's basically entirely like it's inside of the GitHub repo. So I have I wonder if I can get to it from here. I basically have like this action that I wrote. I don't know how familiar, are you familiar with GitHub Actions?
A bit. I made like a proof of concept for a sanity action to like
Yeah.
deploy video, but
So,
yeah.
so we have this thing called Wrangler, like I mentioned earlier. It's like our open source command line tool for deploying this stuff, and it's basically just like a step.
Ah,
It's like it's a work. What would you call that? This whole thing is like the workflow, and this is, I guess, it's just an action. I find the terminology of actions slightly confusing, but like it's just another step in this workflow where we basically like do some npm installation. We can see here we build the project and we pass in this like read token for Sanity. So like it's all of the API stuff for or the content for this is like behind authentication. Yeah, and then we just publish it, and this basically like this bundles up all the static files and uploads them to KV, which is our like key value store, and then updates the worker's script if there's a change to be made. A lot of the time, the changes obviously are like in the content of like the actual site itself, and like the function which actually runs, you know, like runs go get this KV asset for this path or whatever. Like
yeah.
really rarely changes. So.
So this is kind of like having GitHub doing the CLI command, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and I it's something we definitely want to do, is like have it be built in, but like that's a whole thing that I has to get like roadmapped and stuff like that. And for me, I'm like, this is just how I am, where I'm like, I could build this in a weekend to like satisfy my own purposes. And then it turned out that it was like really something that was like sorely missing. And so we made it just like available on the Cloudflare org. Yeah, and it seems like people are using it, which is cool. It's like one of the first times that I've had like an open source project where I actually have to like be a good open source maintainer, because a lot of the time like that's just like some random code base I open source, but like people do actually use it, and it's been been an interesting learning process, I will say. um, yeah. So yeah, I think we're like super happy with this process, and like it goes to show like it really simplifies, like, because all of the sanity stuff is just like part of the Gatsby build. We just pass in like this environment variable. Like we're not thinking about like, we don't need to like make sure that GitHub Actions can like access some API that we have in like some VPN or something like that, right? Like it's all really like, or is it VPC? Yeah, that's what I mean, VPC. But like it's really just straightforward, and like it's really easy to reason about like how this project builds and how it, and like what the sort of like output of it is at the end. It's just this file of static HTML. It's just, if people are familiar with JAMstack, that's like a pretty common thing that people talk about. But for my team, it was like, I think a lot of their first exposure to like a JAMstack app. And so it was really, made it really easy to kind of wrap your head around.
Did we explain like JAMstack at all?
To like as we were building it.
Yeah, or in this video, like we are now talking about JAMstack and
Oh, yeah,
grabbing
that's
like step
right. Yeah.
JAMstack step back. I don't know.
Yeah, I talk about it here at the beginning of the blog post. I don't know. Do you want to like maybe explain it briefly? And we kind of, I feel like we've covered all of the things that it like actually is concretely without actually talking about the acronym itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so JAMstack is short for JavaScript APIs and Markup, and it's basically the idea that you should like pre-build or your markup and just serve like HTML and JavaScript files to the client when they like go visit your site. And if you want to do like dynamic stuff, you do that by like launching JavaScript in the client side and hitting those APIs and stuff like that. So it's basically building a website without having a server that renders the markup on request. That's basically the idea.
Right. Yeah, and for us, like our documentation is built with Hugo right now. We're going to actually switch to Gatsby this year, but like a lot of people on the team were like pretty familiar with just like static sites as a concept. A lot of people like their personal site is built with like Jekyll or Hugo or stuff like that, right? That's pretty common. And I actually talk about that in this blog post. Like a lot of people's first exposure, I think, to JAMstack is through like that kind of, I'm going to build my own personal website. I'm going to use like Jekyll or Hugo or whatever. So like in that way, it wasn't super hard for them to wrap their head around. I will say, like, I think the part that was maybe the most difficult is like Gatsby is a lot. There's just so much going on, and like it's a really hard yeah, it can just be really hard to get up and running with. And once you figure it out, it's like cool to be in that spot where you're like, okay, I can basically envision how to do like most of the stuff I want in like any project with this. But like, man, it can be such a pain to figure out at the beginning. And so I think that was like the bulk of our sort of our onboarding difficulties. There weren't that many, to be honest, but like, yeah, I think a thing I also talk about in this blog post with like the idea of like pre-building, and you mentioned like anytime you need, so like say the app is loaded, now you're on the client, the app is loaded, like now you need to do something via like client side going and hitting like a JavaScript thing. That obviously like works really well for us because we're a JavaScript serverless thing, right? Like that's, so anytime you need to go do some additional stuff, you just set up a worker. I don't know, do we have time to talk about the bookmarking thing? Do you want to talk about that?
Because this sounded like a good segue to the book.
Yeah, this is basically our experiment. Adam and I were saying like we were really, I mean, like all of the Sanity and Gatsby stuff just like worked so well. It was just like we got really, really close to just being like having it done within like 2 weeks. Obviously the content, like getting all the content in took more time, but like it was really quickly like, oh yeah, like we're basically done, because like it's that kind of like what it looks like in development is basically always what it's going to look like in production. Like it's just going to build out static HTML, it's done. But we wanted to do something a little bit more interesting. And so what we did was we built this bookmarking feature. And this is like a really like even like, yeah, so I'm still like improving this functionality. It's a little it's like not super reliable, to be honest with you, because there's some weird like distributed system stuff that comes into play here. But just like as kind of a brief explanation, like basically what happens here is you can come into a project and you can either bookmark it, or you can obviously oh my gosh, is it broken? No. Well, there you go. Okay. I have things to
Faith,
fix there.
faith is hard.
Yeah. So, okay, there we go. I can bookmark this. And basically what happens here is that we have like user specific, like for every browser basically that comes in here, it's like based on user agent. Like I can just say it because it's open source. Like it's based on IP and user agent. It gets like hashed down into this little hash, and then like you key the like project at the end of it. And in our key value store, we say like this user has bookmarked this project, right? And so
Oh,
it happens. Yeah, it's interesting. We probably are going to end up
yeah.
switching to cookies on that, but the thing that's really sort of fascinating about this, if I open up the inspector here, is that I mentioned like at the very beginning, like the way that workers works is like, in this case, you can almost think of like KV, our like key value store, where our static assets are being like served. That's kind of like the origin in this case. And when that comes through the worker script, we have this really, frankly, like mind-blowing like streaming HTML rewriter and parser, which is like supposed to be a thing that like you can't do, because like, have you seen that like Stack Overflow answer that one time where it's like talking about
Yeah,
parsing
yeah,
HTML and it
yeah.
turns into like crazy text? But it's like this crazy fast. It's written in Rust, and like basically what we do is, as the asset comes through the worker script, we inline this like edge state, and it's just like JSON that is like per user per request. And it
Oh,
basically is like this sort of like, I mean, really, we call it like edge state. It's like really mind blowing. Like I think about it all the time. Like, wow, there's so many cool things you can build with this. Because like without that, it's just like a really plain Gatsby site. But we basically have like this dynamic content that's getting inlined here. And then inside of the like the React application, we basically just like consume this as a like React context that just becomes available anywhere in the application.
that's
Um,
super cool.
yeah, it's cool, but the KV is like it's like an eventually consistent key value
Yeah,
store. And so like
yeah.
a lot of our weirdness has been around like, well, what
But
happens when you bookmark
if
and then
you
you have to,
bookmark something, yeah. So if
sorry,
you
go ahead.
bookmark something in the US and you just like in seconds go to India, you
Yeah.
might have to wait a bit to like.
Right. And so what we've ended up doing, and this is the thing that I'm working on right now, literally was working on it like yesterday, is like now we have this idea of like you bookmark. So it basically falls back to local storage. And so like there's a
Ah,
local
yeah.
storage cache that says like, have you bookmarked recently? It like kind of expires basically within like a minute, which is like usually KV's sort of consistency promise, I guess you could say, is like a minute. So now it will, and it's much more reliable, which is nice. You can see, like, I guess literally I can't unbookmark right now on production, which is not great, but it'll let you like bookmark or unbookmark, and then that gets sort of locally cached inside of local storage. But yeah, this like idea of, it's something that like at risk of sounding like very sort of like hypey and salesy, like it is something that workers can only really do because of like the way, like where it sort of sits in the um, like in the sort of diagram of how requests are coming back and forth from your client, as well as like we have this like crazy HTML rewriter thing. I keep telling people that what we need to do is just build like a jQuery API on top of it. And like, I think I don't even know like the potential there of having like jQuery on the edge seems like crazy to me, but like, I feel like it'd be cool. I just don't know what I would do with it. But like, if there's so many things you can do. Like, this web scraper project that Adam built, it basically like makes a request to other websites and then like just like streams it through the HTML parser and returns it as like JSON and lets you just like scrape any website. And there's like a whole API that powers it and stuff. It's crazy. It's like, it's really cool. There's a lot of cool platform stuff again, like to the idea of this original site that like people are starting to explore and we need to like document that somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I can, yeah, you can make all sorts of like cool and fun and yeah, and useful stuff with this, I imagine.
Yeah.
Definitely go check that out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like for like API stuff, it maybe isn't as immediately useful, but like you do just have like direct sort of like JSON. You have access to like the JSON class and stuff inside of a worker. But for any sort of like client facing stuff,
Yeah.
yeah, like I really feel like this is like scratching the surface of it. And I mentioned that in the blog post where like there's so many cool things that I think we need to start exploring. Fingers crossed that like the way that my like year has been told to me is that I basically get to go like work on figuring out what this means for like the next couple months after this, which I'm pretty excited about. So.
And I keep looking for good excuses to like dive into Rust and stuff
Mm-hmm.
because it supports it. So I should do something with it. But I don't
Yeah.
know what. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a pretty good like tutorial on like how to write a Rust function, and that gets compiled with WebAssembly, and then you could just like run it as a workers function. But I tweeted a thing a couple days ago, like our CLI is also just Rust. I've actually like contributed some stuff to it, and Rust is really cool. Yeah, it's I'm lucky that like on our team, my manager is Ashley, is like one of the Rust core team people. And I think we all benefit from that, where we can like run into something and then be like, like, how do we do this? And if she doesn't know, she like knows the person who will know. So yeah, yeah, I think that's another really interesting thing about workers is like, there's definitely the opportunity to like take, anything that's like really sort of like slow in JavaScript. In theory, you could rewrite it in Rust and it would be like way faster. I wish that as a full stack developer, I had those things come to mind with me like more naturally, but to be honest, I don't, because I'm like, oh, like I write React apps and like sometimes APIs to make them do cooler things, you know what I mean? But like that would be something cool, I think, to definitely explore as well.
Yeah, I imagine you can like make like interesting image transformation endpoints or what have you.
Sure.
Yeah.
We have a team that has been working on like an image like resizing and like optimization tool, and it is a Rust worker that's deployed, and it's just like internal inside of Cloudflare servers. That's another cool thing, is like it's made it a lot easier for people at Cloudflare to build stuff because it's like so easy to write, and you can just deploy it in our servers. I think they used to write Lua scripts, and I think
Yeah.
I've never written Lua, but like I maybe that's straightforward, but I wouldn't find that straightforward. But like, yeah, I think everyone's been really happy with having this like toolkit available.
Yeah, so cool. Yeah, we should perhaps wrap up
Yeah,
soon, but this has been like super educational, and it's always for us that like makes this like the sanity stuff. It's always fun to see what people are doing with it,
yeah,
and the studios, and I of course have a bunch of like suggestions for how we can like customize it and make it like a Cloudflare studio and so on. But we
totally.
can perhaps come back to that later.
Yeah, I would love that. Well, I would say like, for instance, we're not doing any like previewing or anything like that inside of the studio.
Yeah.
And that's something that we could be doing. I just
Well,
have never really tackled it. So yeah, I would love to hear that. And I was telling you before we started, like I personally, as someone who uses Sanity for other stuff too, like I really like seeing other people's studios and stuff. Like rarely am I like super surprised, right? Like that's the cool thing, is like, I think it's made me better at sort of understanding how stuff is structured by building my own Sanity stuff. Like rarely do I feel like I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. But it is just sort of nice to see like how other people sort of, conceptually think about this stuff.
yeah.
So.
Talking about those other things that you do.
Oh yeah. Ooh, good segue. Yeah. Yeah. So I have a thing that you mentioned called Bitesize. Oh, that's my face. Hello. So yeah, I basically I think you could sort of roughly describe what I do at Bitesize as like YouTuber and conference organizer. So I organize these like free live stream conferences called ByteConf. We like just like literally a week ago had ByteConf GraphQL 2020. It's like a GraphQL conference with like a dozen speakers. And that gets streamed on YouTube. On Monday, I am announcing ByteConf React 2020, which is going to be on May 1st. Yes, I'm keeping going. There are no breaks. Okay, I had like a week to just like relax, but the main thing I would point people to if they're interested in that stuff and actually relevant to this and to sanity and stuff like that is the YouTube channel Bitesize. I actually have done a couple of videos exploring like the Bitesize sanity integration and stuff. A recent one, if I can find it, was a video on building what I called, oh, you can see my private videos. Those are the videos that are getting uploaded from the conference in the next couple of days. I actually did this like 1 hour video. Hello, I don't know if you heard that, but that was my voice really loudly. Basically like showing how I build new features in Sanity and stuff like that. Maybe that would be like a cool thing to link here as well. Yeah, I use it all over the place, as you know. So yeah. So definitely bitesize.xyz for people want to check that stuff out. I also have a very, very intense email thing. So when you join my newsletter, you will hear me many, many times in your inbox or see me many times in your inbox. So
yeah, and you are at Signal Nerve at
yes. Yeah. We could link to that in the description. Yeah, I mostly just like get pissed off about politics on Twitter, but if you want to follow me, feel free.
You aren't on Twitter, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a Bitesize Twitter too where we announce like conference stuff and things like that. So
All right, I'm being thrown out of this room.
Cool, perfect timing.
But yeah, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Super cool.
Yeah, this was awesome. And I would really like to hear if you have suggestions and improvements and stuff. Like we're pretty committed to using Sanity for this project and I imagine other things in the future. So I would love to hear thoughts.
Yeah, I'll get in touch.
Yeah.
Or perhaps we could do a video. I don't know.
I would be totally down. Yeah, I would love to see like I said, all of the data. We don't really have any sort of private stuff in there, like things that are, maybe we have some things that are like drafts that aren't on the site, but like generally everything that's on there is getting output onto the site. So yeah, we could do like a little bit of like a pairing session. I think previews to me seem like the most natural thing to tackle because that would be useful for other people who aren't running the app locally. But yeah, there's probably other things too.
Yeah, let's do that.
Cool.
Yeah, so I guess bye for now.
Yeah, cool.
See you in cyberspace.
Yes.